All right, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're going to get started here in just a minute. We are waiting for our second panelist of the day. But while we are getting ready, your fourth and final icebreaker question is if you could pick one issue in your community to address through a campaign, what would it be? What would you want to get people to take action on? If you were to put all of the skills that you've learned throughout this training program into action, what would that look like? So go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. We will get started here in just a minute. Alrighty. Still waiting for our second panelist of the day, but that's okay. Really great to see some familiar names here. We have Singapore, focusing on biodiversity loss, lack of education, the effect of vapes and cigarettes on the ocean. Yes, marine plastic pollution. We have friends from Namibia, all across the United States. Where else? Yes, waste segregation, toxic landfills, phasing out plastic bottles in schools. Love that one. Address the protection of marine mammals. We have friends from the UK and Wales, balloon releases. Yes, Tanzania, hello. Good to see everybody's kind of getting the gears turning for this conversation today. Give me one second here. Hmm. Okay, give me 1 minute here. Apologies, folks. I hope you guys are all ready for a great conversation today. I'm gonna pretty sure we're gonna have our second host in here in just a minute. But while we are waiting, I'm gonna go ahead and just start the initial announcements. So we have been able to upload all of the recordings for all of the first three sessions to the World Ocean Day YouTube channel. So if you've missed any of these sessions, definitely feel free to check that out on YouTube. They're all together in a little playlist, easy for you guys. And we definitely want to make sure you're getting the most out of this program. So if you have missed a session, definitely be sure to check that out. Now, again, this is kind of the same basic structure that we've had for the past couple of sessions, just going through the agenda for today. I'm going to introduce our panelists, get into the discussion, get into the Q&A. As always, feel free to use the chat and the Q&A feature as we're having these conversations, and you will be able to chat with our panelists at the end of the session. Now, we also have gotten a lot of questions about certificate of completion for the program, and we will definitely be able to provide those for you guys. Just make sure that you're paying attention to the announcement at the end of this session that talks all about that. We will talk about it. And yeah, you guys will definitely be able to earn your certificate. Now, I'm still holding out, trying to see if we're going to get Matt in here. Let's see. Okay, well, we are hoping to have Matt join us today for sure. Just a couple of technical difficulties, and that's okay. So I will start by introducing our first speaker, Jose Reyeros. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. He is a climate organizer and ocean leader fellow at the Sustainable Ocean Alliance from Mexico. He has a lot of really awesome experience doing campaign organizing. I'm really excited to have him here today. So, Jose, I'll let you go ahead and spend a minute or two introducing yourself.
Hi everyone. You had my last name perfectly. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I really love being able to share my story with other youth that are either finding their way through what advocacy means to them, understanding better how they connect to the communities, to the coastal towns, to the biodiversity around them. And yeah, I think that for me, it's been an amazing year to really scale that because there's so many opportunities out there for youth to take actions. I know here in the room, there's Alex, who's also an Ocean Leader Fellow, and I know Sonia, who's in your youth advisory also as well. So I think that this kind of space is just so great to create community and make it around friendship. So yeah, really happy to be here. My involvement has kind of gone through all over. I have been a climate organizer for policies that involve more green jobs and ways in which we can mobilize people in different movements that are intersectional, that really try to carry through empathy and through relations first, but really trying to work more around energy transition and more the systemic shifts needed. I'm currently actually in Belém in Brazil for the COP30. This is one of the most relevant climate conferences out there. And so, yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see all of that. But yeah, I've been able to connect a lot with the Amazon River lately. And so, yeah, really reflecting on the depth of importance that is to really know what you protect. Because I believe it's the words of Jacques Cousteau that says that you got to know what you got to know to love. And if you love it, you'll protect it, right? So, yeah, really happy to be here.
Awesome, Jose. Thank you so much. I'm still trying to make sure Matthew is able to join, so I am going to move past his introduction a little bit quickly. I'm just going to introduce him and hopefully we'll get him on. Our other panelist today is Matt Gianni. He's the co-founder, political and policy advisor to the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition. He is currently based in Amsterdam and he has a ton of experience on high level international ocean governance. And he has a lot of experience with larger campaigns. Oh, here we have Matt. Yay, I'm so glad you were able to get in. We were just about to introduce you. So if you need a second to settle in, that's great. But if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, now would be the time to do that. Good to see you.
Okay. Yeah, good to see you too, Laura, and you, Jose, as well. Yeah, Matthew Gianni, co-founder of the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition. I've been working on campaigning, international law, policy, etc. for over 30 years. Began my activist life as a commercial fisherman, fighting against a dredge disposal project off the Central California coast where I was working at the time. Then went to work for Greenpeace, eventually ran the Oceans program for Greenpeace. And about 20 years ago, decided to take an issue, try to basically bring together a coalition to take a campaign to the United Nations General Assembly to try to stop deep water trawling on the high seas. And we're still going at it. We've won a lot. And we're also now working on trying to stop deep sea bed mining from getting underway and a variety of other issues. So I hope that covers it. And
Yes,
thanks,
Matt,
Laura.
thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad you were able to join us. Apologies for the technical difficulties, but we're here now, so we're gonna get started. So starting out, I mean, both of you have really, really incredible experience with the act of building collective power for action. And that requires a lot of teamwork, patience, determination. And our audience today is largely young people who likely don't have any experience hosting or leading their own campaign themselves. So it can be a little bit overwhelming. So starting kind of big picture here, what is the role that these campaigns play in terms of building that collective power? How does building collective power through campaigns lead to substantial and lasting change in the broader movement? We all kind of have similar goals in terms of conservation, and so how do we kind of move towards that through campaigns? I'll pass it off to either Jose or Matt, whichever one of you guys wants to answer first. Go ahead.
Oh, Jose, if you can go first. I had to get a better internet connection here, so
Go
please.
ahead, Jose.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is an amazing question. I think that I'd like to address it from the side of there's so much going on in the world right now. Efforts to protect and conserve and regenerate our ocean, our coasts, the different ecosystems that really are the planetary health indicators. Just this year, we crossed some tipping points with coral reefs that are irreversible. We're seeing as well ocean acidification cross its planetary boundary from a safe state to a more place of urgency where we're seeing oxygenation decrease, we're seeing acidification increase, we're seeing so many of these triggers that will worsen the climate emergency. And so this creates a lot of panic, really. And when you begin to see these things, speaking from experience, I think that we can begin to see all these different things being done from the UN Ocean Decade, the Sustainable Development Goals. There's the Plastics Treaty, there's the ICES Treaty, all these different things that at the macro level are working. The more community approach, it can get a little bit blurry to think, what can I do if I'm a young person, if I'm someone who needs to get started? But let me tell you that the most important thing for you is to think that small is enough, that trying is more than any amount of years of experience. When I first started working with campaigns to stop deep sea mining, to fight against LNG off the coast of the Gulf of California, to work to for the conservation of southern and western killer whales in coast sailage, there's so many different ways in which campaigns are being done in a way that is designed to create collective power by you, by people like you and me, people who don't really need to be the change makers, the superstars, the celebrities. There's such a big notion that we all have to be doing so much, when in reality, there is so many ways in which we can be doing our part. And so I think that what we can really think about is that substantial and lasting change will only happen if we create the capacities for us to keep doing this in the longer run. And that involves being passionate about those things. If you get yourself to a point of, let's say, burnout and lack of community and connection, then that's not going to be lasting for you. And we really need to root it in community. And that's why collective is so important.
Yeah, absolutely, Jose. Matthew, I'll pass it off to you.
Well, I think Jose did a pretty good job of explaining that, and I agree with virtually everything you've said, Jose. I mean, I can speak from my experience, just on several different points. Number one, I've worked a lot with governments to try to get changes at the international level, changes to international laws and so forth. I work in the ocean sphere. I work there primarily because that's something I have experience in. I don't have a university education as a marine biologist. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a lawyer, but I was a fisherman. And I was passionate about sustainability and long-term livelihoods and so forth. And so I kind of built from that experience to the global campaigning. But when working with governments, you can sometimes get governments to agree to things. And then the next election comes around. And if you don't have a base of support in the country or through other influencers that the government people listen to, your victory can just evaporate like that. And of course, we can see what's happened in the United States with efforts to combat climate change and promote renewables. Donald Trump got into office and boom. Even though there is a strong base of people in the United States campaigning still and even more forcefully to fight for the green transition and to combat climate change. But I do think, and like Jose has said, you really need a broad community, a broad base, and you need determination. Nothing that's, well, I shouldn't say nothing. I should say to get something real, to accomplish something that's going to make lasting change, you have to expect that it's going to take a while, and you have to expect that once you get that victory, whether it's a resolution out of the General Assembly or a new law that the government or a regional treaty body adopts, you will still have to fight to get it implemented, and you will still have to fight and continue to keep track of what's going on and to weigh in on what's going on to make sure that somebody doesn't come, a few years later and just eliminate the law or overturn the law or decide to create a new one. So again, you can depend on hugely influential people like the Secretary General of the United Nations, like the president or a particular minister in a country, but the lasting change comes when enough people demand that a change be made and that the government sticks to implementing that change.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting. I think during this conversation, we're going to be doing a lot of zooming in and zooming out in terms of the scale of campaigns that we're talking about, because there are these much larger legislative pushes, like you were talking about, Matt, in terms of like federal level, national level, talking about highest level of policymakers in your relative nation. And then we also are talking about the smaller campaigns. There was somebody in the chat introducing themselves earlier who mentioned that a campaign they might be interested in is phasing out plastic at their school. And a lot of these principles that we're talking about still apply, even at that smaller scale. So just keep that in mind, folks, as we are moving through this conversation. We're not only talking about this huge, like, big picture stuff, we're also talking about small local action. So on that note, as we're starting off as young people, we've talked a lot about in the last two sessions, defining our audience, making sure we have the right people around us. But when we talk about a collective goal, we all kind of have different opinions on how we should reach certain goals, and sometimes we can get in our own way when it comes to figuring out what our best steps to take are. But one of the things that make a campaign consistent and effective is having consistent messaging. That makes your team more effective. It makes the campaign more effective. It helps everybody stay more committed to the cause. So for the young people who are watching, what are the first couple of best steps that young advocates can take to move from a shared vision to collective action? How do they take that collective goal and actually move in that direction? I'll pass it off to either one of you who wants to go first.
Jose, why don't you go first again?
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, I mean, I would love to talk a little bit about what's happening right now at Top 30 and a campaign we're bringing forward. Me and my friend Mark Haver, who's an amazing organizer, also with Sustainable Ocean Alliance, has worked tons, I'm sure Matthew you're in touch with. But we're working an issue that first have to bring us a lot of clarity. Mark and I have worked a lot in the ocean space and also the climate space. And we have noticed that there is such a big gap between both worlds. There are a lot of intersections. There is such a relevance for the ocean as a carbon sink, as a regulator for our climate, as such a source of sustain for so many people. 3 billion people depend on this planet from the ocean directly. And so I think that we have noticed that there is a need to center the ocean in the climate conversation. particularly in stages like COP and the UNFCCC, and where so many different countries around the world and leaders pay attention closely to these issues. And so for us, it is about having that clarity, that alignment, that internal fire align and multiply, because the ripples that we're creating with this campaign have been, let me tell you, so amazing. We're getting different letters, we're getting different posts, education going, and all of this has come from the inspiration of finding that alignment. I think that's once that we can have a shared vision as a collective, as a group of friends trying to, let's say, eliminate plastics from the school, you need to really think who are the people around me who can help me get there, because this is something that has to be done as a team. And so, other than that, I think that once that you begin to increase the complexity of these things, you begin to have a campaign, and that slowly forms organically as you begin to learn more and more. And let me tell you that this has to be a learning process that comes with experience. You need to make mistakes, you need to do things differently, you need to do them by yourself sometimes, but you need to rely on other people as well. And there's such a large community out there that I think one of the biggest issues with organizing is that we don't talk enough between each other. And I really think that if we can talk to the mentors across generations, across spaces, the way that we're doing it and this campaign, I think that there is so much potential. Right now, with the Commit to Ocean campaign that we are doing at COP30, we're getting reach with mentions from the UN Ocean Envoy for COP30, where we're having some of the same language that we're using in some of our campaigning. And so really these things are the ones that let you know that things are clicking, that people are hearing. And so, yeah, it's all part of being of this large community of people that really care, that really have the expertise. But I think that as young people, we need to make our case strong with a lot of companies. We need to really think about how we can be advocates that are young but mighty, and that despite the lack of experience, we can have so much say on these spaces because no one else has this internal fire the same way that we do.
Absolutely. I would agree with those points as well. Matt, go ahead and add whatever you
Yeah,
to this.
I'll add a few things. Well, first of all, I think going back to something that Jose said earlier, you know, people in these positions, the negotiators at the climate COP, for example, negotiators on the plastics treaty, negotiators that are involved at the UN on a variety of issues, more and more they're willing to listen to youth. Now, sometimes they'll listen to you and then simply ignore you. Those are the kinds of frustrations and the setbacks and so forth that you'll experience in any campaign. But youth really do have a voice that kind of cuts punches above its weight when it comes to campaigning, and you can get the ear of people more easily sometimes than, well, the older folks like myself, for example. But let me say on what Laura made an important point too is that if you're working collectively and you're trying to work a political process, your your messaging has to be the same or very, very complementary, because governments will look to see if they can pick apart the NGOs and say, well, we'll get one NGO to endorse what we're saying, even though the other NGO realizes what we're saying is not going to solve the problem. But we can divide and conquer amongst the civil society organizations. So you need, and that's just not with, you know, a point of action or kind of a strategy for your organization alone, but the coalitions that you end up working with, whether you're trying to develop a coalition with other organizations or whether you form these coalitions as you're participating in events like the COP30, for example, and you find other like-minded organizations also trying to get the same thing that you're trying to get. But the only thing I'd say in the end, the final point here on this is you need a variety of different skill sets. And I learned that early on when I was a fisherman and we were campaigning against, and successfully so, against this dredge disposal project. It was something that we had heard about only at the last minute. They were going to dump 5.4 million tons of dredge disposal on our fishing grounds. And we said, well, we got to fight this. We can't just take this lying down, even though there was over $100 million behind it and so forth. And as it turns out, one of the guys that was fishing was good at public speaking. He became our press spokesperson. I took apart the environmental impact assessment because I had a bit of a science background. Another guy was great at organizing. and organized an at-sea blockade. Another guy was our sort of direct action guy. He took a big old box of rotting fish carcasses and dumped them on the front steps of the Port of Oakland, California, the head office of the Port of Oakland, California. And they called the police to arrest him. And when they realized he was a fisherman and the press were coming, they tried to get rid of him. But by then, the word was out. And so, what you need are different skill sets. And that can be, some of those require a college education, some of them don't. Some of them could be in science, some of them could be environment, some of them could be ethics, because you're appealing to people with of a religious persuasion and saying, hey, this kind of thing that's happening is wrong and we need to correct this. Maybe somebody needs to have a good feel for the economics to kind of counter argue against the industry, saying, well, it's going to cost us 20,000 jobs and millions of dollars in stock value and everything else. So again, the broader the spectrum of a like-minded group, the spectrum of expertise within a like-minded group, and that's the kind of folks you have to go and find, the stronger you're going to be able to argue your case.
Yeah, absolutely. And Matt, I think you touched on some really important points that are relevant to the second question here. And honestly, both of you touched on this a bit. How can youth leaders ensure that their personal motivations align with the shared goals of the campaign? And I think largely that is due to having the right people around you, for sure. We don't have to spend too much time on this specific question, like I said, because you guys already covered it. But Matt, Jose, do you have anything to add to that particular bit before we move on?
Yeah, I would say that
Oh,
if the right communication exists, then there is little difference between the personal motivation and the shared goals. I think that finding that intersection, that alignment is key to a successful campaign. So always making sure that there is accountability to what are our internal biases, to why are we doing this, and consistently checking in with the people who are involved in this. Oftentimes, when it comes to conservation, we often try to take away the human elements, even especially the class elements. And so I think it's really important to always be checking on the truth of the fact of why you're doing this campaign. Is it just to do a species focus advocacy? Is it to do an energy focus? Is it to do a sustainability overall? Are you considering the people who are not sitting on the table? That's always a question that I ask. So.
mm. Yeah, and I just add, Laura, that to what Jose said, to say, it takes work to cooperate. And sometimes you'll run into situations where you're questioning the motivations of some of the people you're working with. Sometimes you'll run into situations, I think that Jose was, what I heard you say, Jose, is that you have different people saying, well, I want to accomplish this with this campaign, protect the species as opposed to stop pollution in the ocean or something like this. And so you need to communicate, and critically, you need to, and this comes back to your point on messaging, Laura, is when you gain something or when something specific happens, whether an opportunity opens up or whether you're facing a setback, you need to communicate with each other to say, okay, how are we going to handle this collectively? We're not going to let it take us down, or we're not going to now run off in different directions. We need to keep our messaging going. Let's really look at where we're at in terms of our strategy, and if we need to change it, or if we can continue on the same strategy, whether we're taking up advantage of opportunities as they come up. And sometimes they come up out of nowhere. You may be asking a government or a set of governments to do something for a year and they just don't budge. They're not interested. And then all of a sudden, somebody says, hey, that's a really good idea. I'll put that forward as a proposal at the conference. And then you can round up everybody else to say, hey, country X is going to propose this. You got to support it, and so forth and so on. But again, communicating the right message, a consistent message, I should say, is really, really important. And that takes, cooperating within your team as well as with the broader range of organizations and people that you're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those check-ins are hugely important. Like you mentioned, I think we kind of instinctively know to do that when we face a loss in a campaign, like, okay, how's everybody doing? Like, how do we move forward and rebuild or whatever? But we also need to make sure we're checking in after wins too, because that can also change things in ways that you might not be expecting. So I think that's really key part there as well. Okay, so we're gonna move to the role of policy-based advocacy specifically. Many grassroots efforts achieve both longer lasting and more effective impacts when they are tied to specific policy, which is one of the key things that we've been talking about here, that really consistent, like kind of North Star goal that we are focusing on. So, um, when you're starting a grassroots campaign, I'll use that phasing out plastics at their school example as we move through this conversation. If a student wants to phase out plastics at their school, there are definitely going to be opportunities to connect that grassroots campaign with broader policy and legislative efforts. So what does that look like? Like, how can young people go about doing that? And what advice do you have for people who are working towards that type of goal, who want to engage directly with the policymakers as they connect them to these legislative efforts? Matthew, I'll have you go first this time.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Lara. I guess what I would say, and this is something I would say for any campaign, get a sense of the lay of the land, especially if you're going to try to reach out beyond the specific, for example, school project to get rid of plastics, for example, in the cafeteria, if that's what you're doing, and look around and see, okay, how can we broaden this campaign? Who's working on this? Are there other schools that are working on this? Are they up on social media? Can we build a network of schools doing this and then start forcing the educators to have to respond, and maybe the government agencies that regulate education and so forth and so on? See which NGOs are working on your issue and how they can help you get your issue launched at a broader level, or alternatively, how you can work with them to help broaden their efforts. And the other thing too is if you're working on something that deals with policy or legislation or international negotiations, you need to know the timing of things. When are governments going to be paying attention to a specific issue? You can, if you miss the right time, you can go to negotiators and say, we really want you to do this. They say, well, yeah, we debated that yesterday. We're on a different agenda item now. Sorry, tell me something I need to know for today's agenda. And similarly, who is doing the negotiating? What government agencies that they come from? If you're working in a school, for example, who in the school administration is responsible for purchasing, so that you know exactly who to go to say, this is what we want you to do. Who has the influence over the school, overall the school's responsibilities or activities? Is it a board? Is it the headmaster or mistress, et cetera? And I don't know if I'm using terms correct here, headmaster or mistress. I'm trying to think, who the hell runs the school? But anyway, I've been out of school for too long, I think. But seriously, just to get a feel for the lay of the land, get a feel for the timing of the debate, the discussion, and the decision making, and plug yourself in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to your point, in identifying the correct people who can connect you with the correct people is really, really big in this part of this discussion. So, Jose, do you have anything to add to this piece as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think more and more we're seeing more programs and communities that live digitally, that have the advisory roles, that have the many different ways in which young people can access mentorship networks. And especially, I think that when we have expectations about what mentorship looks like, I think there has to be clear asks. And also, a lot of times, mentorship will be connecting and amplifying and giving us the tools to know where to take our messages, where to take our conversations, so that we can get leads into what's the more specialized information that can help us break through our campaigns or the projects that we have. And so, say you're in your school, talk, as Matthew was saying correctly. There is so much that people have done in the past. There's other groups that have been working on this. What has been done? What has been successful? What are different challenges? It's always evolving. I think that when it comes to policy, there is so much going on. The layout of policy right now is grim compared to how it has been in other times. And so I think we need to be very mindful as well of what are the bigger things that are becoming challenges for climate and ocean advocacy. Particularly seeing rise of fascist governments, rise of censorship, and also where most of organizing happening, which is in digital media. And a lot of the digital media is corporate owned and has very biased interests. And so we need to consider these things. One thing that happens a lot you use Signal and you use encrypted messaging, you need to be very careful with how you do actual campaigning that will make a difference. Because, yeah, not to be too Orwellian, but this is how activism is happening as we speak. And so, really, really, I think that there is so much we can be doing. Tap into those networks, the group chats. Really, a lot of what community organizing is talking to people, understanding, as you said, the lay of the land, and going from there. Not much more to add.
Yeah, I really appreciate, Jose, that you touched on the critical importance of data security in this conversation.
Yeah.
Um, Throughout history, grassroots movements have, in various ways been really successful or have struggled to kind of meet the needs of changing technology and most effective ways of organizing. And we're at this point right now where, like you said, the algorithms are kind of actively working against us in a lot of cases. And, protecting ourselves is going to be really important moving forward. Absolutely. So I really appreciate that you brought that into this conversation for sure. Now, kind of speaking about data a little bit here, kind of drawing that through line, in order to have a successful campaign, like we need to kind of define what that actually means. Like we talked about in session 2, our social media and communication session, that like when we are trying to do a storytelling campaign on social media, an educational campaign, if your goal is a really localized effort and you're talking about an endemic species that is only found in your community, the point might not necessarily be virality and big numbers. Like the success of the campaign in that case would be more defined by the level of engagement on a local level. And that kind of concept looks really different depending on like what your campaign goals are, where you are operating with your campaign. So for each of you, on both a local scale and a broader scale, what actually defines a successful campaign? And then as you're going through your process with your team to define whether or not your campaign was actually successful, what are some of the metrics that you should be looking at to see if you actually reached those goals? I'll pass it over to whoever wants to go first for this one.
I'll take a stab at it, but I'm sure Jose, you have a lot of experience on this as well. I think you have to decide in advance what your measures of success are. I mean, and you will have, the overall success. If you're trying to stop something, then the success is having that activity stop, that industry moving away from the area you're trying to protect, or that type of fishing, for example, which in my case, campaigning against deep water trawling, and which damages countless species in the deep ocean. Um, but you also, I think, do need concrete steps or measures to give you a sense of how well you're moving toward that goal. And it's not going to be an orderly process necessarily. Again, as I mentioned, there are times where you can continue to try to get to step 2 and you're just not going to make it. You're not getting the change. And then all of a sudden, an opportunity opens up and you can jump to step 4. Or you change your strategy altogether and you say, well, what we thought was success to begin with is probably not going to happen, but here's another pathway to get what we were trying to get in the first place. I mean, I'm speaking abstractly here, but it really does happen when you're campaigning. There's also a gut instinct. There are times when when you're campaigning that you're gaining something, you're winning something. You can feel it. And here you may have challenges, for example, in working with funders. Funders want to see a measured success, the metrics, the milestones. There's a whole language of how to measure whether, from the funder's point of view, measure whether in fact what they're funding is actually getting accomplished. And so you need some of that to communicate out your success. But for example, I mean, I've been in situations where we have basically gone back to funders and said, look, this strategy didn't work. This part of our strategy did not work last year, so we've changed it to this. And we think this is what's going to get us to the ultimate goal in this campaign. And again, if you're working with decent funders and they trust you and they see and you're communicating well with them, they'll accept that, or they should accept that by and large. But again, I have to say, and I've been in campaigning for over 30 years, and I've seen, organizations like Greenpeace that I worked with get a political victory, a declaration, a ministerial declaration, da 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 da, which is very good on paper, and then they walk away from it. And as it turns out, the governments that are, or the government agencies that are responsible for implementing it, find 1,000 ways to basically say they're doing it when they don't, or they've interpreted it in a way that it wasn't originally intended, or nobody's going to challenge them or is paying attention anymore. And so they just don't have to, they can ignore the ministerial declaration, or their governments have changed and those ministers are gone and there's a new set of ministers and they have other priorities. So again, long-term success and long-term change, which is part of what this webinar is about, I think requires dedication and sticking to the job and continuing to keep a focus on what you've won and make sure that it's effectively implemented and that the change is, as much as it can be, permanent improvement on whatever issue you've been working on.
Absolutely. Everything that you said, I wish I had been taking notes as you were talking, honestly, because that is super, super helpful to just keep in the back of your head as you're moving forward through your first campaign as a young person. Jose, what do you have to add?
It's gonna be hard to keep up with that, but I would say that um, look, I mean, it's really cool because I think that what Matthew brings is a lot of experience on how large scale nonprofit organizations deal with this. And I think there's so many pressures that come with what success means for a campaign, right? I mean, you need money to do these campaigns. So there's funders to keep happy. There's also communities that support you. So then that's also one more lever. Then you begin to think about what is the baseline of the actual work that you're doing for, and maybe that is an emergency, something that is urgent, that requires action, that is more directed. And so I think we need to recognize that there's this diversity, this spectrum of pressures that define what success will mean. And I think that as time goes, those will always be changing. I mean, the difference between how, let's say, the deep sea mining industry was years ago, when there was so much of the precautionary policy and the regulations that we work with. And now we have things such as actually seeing the loopholes of how advocacy is happening internationally to get this work done, and how this is being framed as better than land-based mining, and all of these different things that have such complications. Similarly, with other things such as thinking about really what those measures will be for a movement. If a community is not able to keep doing this work for the long run, then what is the point of making some policies that then later can be reversed? We live in democracies that at any point we could have the US push for the Paris Agreement, then pull back out, then pull back in, then pull back out. So I think that really what we need is to find ways in which success for campaigns is based on indicators that really consider people doing the work, especially the land defenders, especially indigenous people, especially people at the front lines. And so I think that this gives perspective, because so much of the work we do works under colonial systems and paradigms. And I think that if we recognize those, then we also have to recognize that liberation from systems of oppression that are harming our ocean or harming our climate are part of this larger movement. And I think that that also has to always be at the center of how we measure our success in campaigns. It gets really complicated. I'm not going to say I have the answers for it, but I would say that, there's been occasions in which a campaign maybe doesn't cover the actual target we had in the beginning, but it did bring people closer and it did bring some more momentum. And so sometimes those things are very important to keep in mind so that we can keep these notes going.
Yeah, absolutely, Jose. Both of you mentioned such important aspects of defining success of a campaign, and I think both of you brought up the key point that the goalposts are always moving. There's never going to be a standardized metric of what is correct or successful, or um, whatever works, right? Like it's always going to be different. The cases that we look at are all different in terms of the threats that that particular species or ecosystem habitat is up against, the people who are behind those threats, the system that is causing those threats, Jose, to your point. And really, I think both of you touched on this as well. Celebrating the successes, no matter how small, is also a very, very important thing to do just for um maintaining hope and like positivity with your team and yourself. Like it's a mental health thing, right? Like making sure that you're actually um taking time to like pause and acknowledge, like, if you do feel a level of success, no matter how small, like you should stop and like marinate in it a little bit. You know what I mean? Like you really have to feel that so you can continue to sustain the momentum, not just within the campaign itself, but also within yourself. Um, so yeah, so I think both of you, like I said, touched on such huge aspects of defining success. And one of those things is engaging with community. Jose, you already talked about working directly with frontlines communities, making sure that, the needs or the goals of the campaign are aligning with the needs of those communities. And really and truly, it doesn't matter what the issue is that we're focusing on. If that issue is impacting a group of people, that issue is always going to impact everybody in that group a little bit different. And we need to make sure that we are addressing that and acknowledging that. So, when you are a young person leading a campaign, how can you make sure that the campaign itself is genuinely reflecting and supporting the needs of the communities they serve? The second part of this question is also something that you guys have already kind of touched on, is how can young people identify and engage with community leaders in schools, local NGOs, and those types of groups as well. So first part of this question, or I guess the first two questions on the screen will go first. But yeah, I'll pass it off to either one of you who wants to go first.
Jose, why don't you take this?
Yeah. Community is my expertise, so I'd love to. I run an organization that's called Ritmos Climáticos, translates to climate rhythms. This was born out of a university group that diverse, it was very diverse, really worked in different grassroots movements. And we decided to do this big mobilization to divest our university from all of these extractive industries in our endowment fund. Had some great momentum, did some great advocacy that resulted in actual movement of the investment portfolios of the university, as well as creating a lot of solidarity networks and lots of music. And that was a really awesome time. From there, we've gone to do all sorts of different kinds of organizing, from ocean advocacy in Baja, in La Paz, as well as working on divestment from LNG and opposing fossil fuels over all over the coastline of the Pacific Ocean, and gotten into all sorts of different ambitious climate policies and whatnot. And so I think that all of this has come from understanding the stories of the people that we organize with. I think that everyone has some level of interest in defending, in caring for, and having empathy. And those stories tell so much already that give you cues into where your organizing takes shape. And I think that it's all about community in the end, on how we shape. Uh, Sometimes we call ourselves a commune. How we're shaping a commune for when collapse happens. We're living almost through a sixth extinction. Planetary boundaries are going off the rough. There's so much that's happening, but we need to come through is not from a place of despair, but from a place of, okay, how do we young people, as powerless, as voiceless, grab what we have and begin to build strong and together? And so once that you get that identity, I think that once that you organize a community, you have a collective, that gives you so much confidence and so much leverage. You can start talking to schools, NGOs, you can talk to city councilors. I really recommend to talk to the people who work closely to people. So that is municipal level government, perhaps. That is perhaps other young people that already work in organizations. There's so many mentors that are young change makers that will be able to give you a hand because they understand and they've been through what you have been. So there's so many cool things that we can do to serve each other. But it really comes down to a term that I love going back to, which is mutual aid. It's this model of how we can support each other in our resistance, in our fighting to protect and to bring things out of them. And so, yeah, that's a bit of what we've been doing over at our community, and obviously always trying to bring it back to our care for waterways, for rivers, for ocean. And one more thing that I want to say is that there are land and water stewards out there. Many, if not most times, it's indigenous people who have lived in harmony with these ecosystems for generations. And so I think it's really important that we come back to listen to those people.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. When talking about the land and water stewards, there really is no need to reinvent the wheel in terms of like the actions that you're taking and doing to protect those spaces. Yes, we might need innovation on how to, move policy through the legislative process, and we might need like innovation in other spaces, but really the ground level, like you don't need to come up with anything new. Like it's been happening. It already exists. You just need to find the people to connect to. So yeah, thank you, Jose, for that beautiful note. I will pass it off to Matthew for this one.
Yeah, I think Jose's covered it very, very well. I mean, what I would only add, and maybe this is repeating something that you said already, Jose, or you've said, Laura, but I think you need to listen to the community and organize the community, organize with the community. If you're not from the community, you need to find people in the community that want change and that are willing to work with you or work together with you, or you're willing to work together with them to actually kind of unite the community or to get it to kind of coalesce around a campaign to try to make things better. And the frontline defenders, for example, in forest, I worked for quite a few years challenging industrial shrimp aquaculture, these massive shrimp farms in tropical, well, from Mexico all the way down to Peru and then across to Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, and then in Southeast Asia and South Asia as well. And I think coming back to something Jose said earlier, there's that these people were the people that were fighting this industry basically reached out to northern-based organizations and said, "We want help from you guys in the marketplace because we are fighting some of the politically most influential people in our countries, the military, the people in government that are buying up this coastal land." Disenfranchising traditional tenure users, forcing them off the land or killing off the mangroves in other sort of insidious ways in order to build shrimp farms. And it affected their livelihoods, it affected their community structures, it affected the way they could actually live and eat and survive. And where I think youth has an advantage is that so many people, by the time they get to where I am, I say, well, okay, it's always been like this. We're just going to have to live with it. We've always lived with this power structure in our community that has forced us to have to accept this degradation and this inequality and so forth, and destruction of our environment, the environment that we need to live off of. And youth, I think, and the young people in the community I'm speaking of, as well as those of you who are the campaigners or working with SOA or whatever, a lot of you, rightfully so, say, no, we don't accept this. We're not going to accept this. We need to change this. And that can inspire people, I think. Even the older people can say, well, if the kids are going to do this and get out there, by God, we got to help them out, And so I think there's a lot there. But again, the power structures can work against you very easily, and you have to be adept at managing that process. And sometimes you have to be really adept. And I don't probably have to say that to many of the folks who are on the people on the call here. But boy, we ran into some wild situations in Ecuador, for example, challenging the shrimp aquaculture industry with one of the Rainbow Warrior, one of the Greenpeace ships that was impounded, and then we escaped, and then the people were under death threats, and then they went to Quito from Huizni on the coast, and it became national news, and the church got involved, and it was like from day to night, and it's all this happened in the space of about a week, and so you really have to be adept to be able to manage some of the kind of the challenges that may come up, especially if your campaign is successful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I would hope that our youth leaders on this call never have to deal with things on the same scale with their own campaigns that groups like Greenpeace have for things that blow up in international news like that. But definitely that having your support network of community leaders is the only thing that's really going to get you out of a bind in that particular situation, but even something much, much smaller scale for sure. Now I want to move to this second question on the screen here, and I think it's really interesting to ask this to both of you because we do have a generational gap between panelists right now, which I think coming from both of those perspectives is going to create something really interesting here, and I'm excited to hear from both of you. So, I mean, both of you, the previous question kind of touched on this: is how can intergenerational collaboration strengthen youth-led campaign efforts, and what are some ways to bridge generational gaps in organizing? Now, there are kind of youth-led organizations and campaigns who need the help from older generations, but it goes the other way too. There are, already previously established kind of adult-led organizations who are seeking the help of youth as well. So I kind of want to get both of your perspectives on that. I'll pass it off to whoever wants to go first.
Jose, I think you're probably well, you can speak from the youth and I'll speak from the I wouldn't call it an elder, the old age. How about that? But go ahead.
We can do it the other way around if you want, but
Yeah.
the answer might not be as good. um, all right, yeah. So, I mean, this is honestly a great question. It is very close to me recently. I think that there are so many ways in which we can learn from each other. I mean, there is a very special kind of perspective that you'd bring into being gullible in some levels. I mean, not to say that that's what you are, but we come into spaces with zero expectations sometimes, and the faith in institutions is not always the highest, especially in our generation. And we really come in to see how we can create systemic change, and that's something that comes to the roots of the problems. It's very radical, and I love that because it gives us a chance to really question what no one else is willing to question. But at the same time, I have noticed that a lot of the perspective of youth advocacy comes from what will youth know? You know, what are the stakes that youth have in all of this? We often are made little. We are often not given a seat on the room. And if we're given the seat in the room, we're not giving a decision maker seat. And so I think that we have to consider these things as we think of what we need to ask as youth from adults. But at the same time, we need to sit and listen. I think that so many times our criticism and the critical perspectives we bring come from a place of thinking that we know better in every case. And I think gaining pragmatism as a young person is a very challenging thing. It's hard, it hurts because it lets us know how complicated things are. There's so many interconnected, complex systems that precede the work that we want to ambition. But I think that we need to learn it. And I think that we need to learn from mentors, from people who are older to us. I really love how in every instance I've had with indigenous communities that work through traditional knowledge that come in this relational field, there is always this idea of coming together and listening to elders. And I think that in such a highly individualized community that we live in the West, which is really disconnected from many family values in many cases, but really stops listening to the generations that precede us. And I think we need to respect our elders. We need to listen to them to better understand how to be future elders at some point.
Mm, mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, Jose. Go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, no, I like what you had to say, Jose, and I agree with you. But yeah, I would also add that I think we both sides can learn from each other. So from my perspective, I've been doing this for 30, 35 years, basically. And I've been lucky in being able to, I've engaged in a lot of campaigns, oceans related campaigns, and I've been lucky to be a part of, again, as a team of folks, uh, big victories. One of the first, for example, when I went to work for Greenpeace was a campaign against high seas drift net fishing. There were several hundred, upwards of several hundred to 1,000 vessels fishing in the North Pacific alone, laying 50,000 kilometers of drift nets per night, going for salmon, tuna, and squid, depending on what latitude they were in. They were catching seals, they were catching whales, they were catching dolphins, they were catching seabirds, they were catching all kinds of other species of fish, they were catching sea turtles. We shut that fishery down. That was a huge victory and a huge conservation victory for the ocean. And this was back in 1992, basically. And this was a kind of a malaise that had started in the North Pacific and had spread throughout the world's oceans. Vessels ended up fishing with drift nets in the Atlantic, coming through the South Pacific and then on into the Indian Ocean, etc. So, um, uh, and there's a lot that goes into a campaign like that. The campaign against bottom trawl fishing on the high seas has been largely successful up to a point, but we're trying to finish the job. And so we're going to be back at the United Nations next year, and we're going to campaigning, and we're going to be getting countries involved, and so forth and so on. We just got a resolution through the IUCN World Conservation Congress calling for an end to bottom trawl fishing on seamounts on the high seas. You know, we're building that collateral pressure that will come to bear when the UNGA, which has already scheduled a review of how this issue has been dealt with over the last 2 decades, is already placed to call for further action and to really call, and so I think we can learn from this. You know, younger people can learn from people who've had this experience doing these campaigns at whatever scale they themselves aspire to make the change. It's the level of the school, the community, the country, the city, or internationally. But at the same time, I think, you know, the older folks can learn from youth, or more importantly, I think you can learn from the older folks that have been involved in saying, okay, this sounds like it really worked, but it's not enough. We got to come up with better ways to do this, because as good as they have been and as effective as they have been, we're facing, already we've gone beyond 1.5 degrees. We're going into a 2-degree scenario minimum, it seems. We've got the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services came out with a report in 2019 that said 1 million species are at risk of extinction, many within the next several decades. This is a whole new sort of ecological and social and ethical landscape we're now working in. We're losing the Amazon. We're losing tropical forests around the world. There are tipping points that may turn these. I'm preaching to the converted here. I think you all know this stuff. And so, what you can learn from the older folks, the folks like myself, is say, okay, what works for you guys? Maybe we can use that, but we're going to have to adapt that, because as much as you've campaigned, you haven't finished, you haven't managed to get the ultimate victory here. And we all need to broaden that effort and build it out. And again, I think the youth, I mean, it's your future more so than my future that you're working for. And I think that is a huge advantage that you have, and that people recognize that, and why the youth voice is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys both so much. I have fully lost track of time. I will completely take that responsibility. We are over the hour right now. I did not realize that until like 5 minutes ago, so my apologies. We do have two questions here in the Q&A, and I'm going to kind of combine them, because these are things that we have kind of touched on in this conversation and in previous sessions as well. So one person asked, how do you encourage people to communicate together and work as a collective? That, I think, very much goes back to the conversation of having consistent messaging, which again, we've talked about today, we've talked about last week and the week before. And then somebody else also asked, do you have any advice about getting local news attention to events or protests or anything like that? Especially as a very young person, I am 16. Getting the news involved, even on a local level, seems like a huge advantage in permanence and collecting to the general community. And I think one of the key points of that is having that consistent messaging. So, really quickly, in a minute or less, do either of you guys have any advice on those points?
I can take a shot at the second one.
Yeah.
So one of my hats in organizing is with the Chili app. I really encourage you to download it. It is an activism app that is designed to let anyone be a campaigner. You can post your actions and get emails sent, and a lot of people will do them for you. Or you can also do social media blitz. People will get comments on accounts from governments to corporations or banks that are doing bad things. And I think that's something that really works for me when I'm looking for emails, perhaps, or to look into the attention of media, is to first reach out to the first person in mind that you think could help you. And if you don't know who that is, this is more debatable. You may consider the ethics of it or not, but I use a tool called Perplexity AI. It has a prompting tool that lets you look up, hey, let me look for emails from all these different media companies or outlets, and it will gather them for you with reliable data from the web. And so, there's different ways in which you can do this, but I really encourage you to really talk to people who work on this kind of work. If there's already working groups that are doing this kind of advocacy in your community, or if there's anyone who inspires you, ask them. And that's always a great good start.
Yeah, I would just say it's the theme of this webinar. The more people you have working together and making noise about something, the more likely you're going to get the attention of the media and other influencers in your communities. I'd also say, just as a sort of a personal thing, if you really want to get involved in something, you know, build your expertise, whether it's with communications, whether it's with the science, whether it's the policy making, and don't take no for an answer. Just say, look, I want to get involved. I want to volunteer for your organization. I want to go do something. I'm going to try to help out. I have something to contribute, and you'll get a lot of rejections, like trying to get published, but be persistent and get involved and join an organization or create an organization, and take it from there. But if I may, Laura, just one thing I did want to mention earlier, which is I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, but Rebecca Solnit is a very good essayist and author, and she wrote an essay called "When the Hero is the Problem." Which was it's online. She wrote it a few years ago, and just a quick quote from it. She said, "Our largest problems won't be solved by heroes. They'll be solved, if they are, by movements, coalitions, civil society. The climate movement, for example, has been first of all a mass effort, and if figures like Bill McKibben stand out, well, he stands out as the co-founder of a global climate action group whose network is in 188 countries. And the guy, McKibben, who keeps saying versions of, quote, the most effective thing you can do about climate as an individual is stop being an individual, and work with a whole group of folks trying to get for the same goal. So I just wanted to throw that out. I thought it was, I like Rebecca Solnit. She's a great writer, a great essayist, and an inspiration to many.
Matthew, I think that is the perfect way to wrap up not only this session, but the program, with this being the final session. I think that absolutely ties a bow on all of the conversations we've had over the last 4 weeks of this program. Thank you so much for that. And Jose as well. So I just wanted to say thank you both very, very much. Check out our panelist chat if you can while I'm making this announcement. Just see what my colleague Jihyun had sent about joining us for an additional 30 minutes if you have time. If not, no worries. But for our viewers, as I mentioned, the certificate of completion, we will be sending out a Google survey in a follow-up email. I'm not sure if that's going to go out today or on Monday, but keep your eye out for it. Once you are able to submit your fully completed survey, and completed means all of the questions have been answered, before the deadline, you will be able to receive your certificate. The other thing to remember is you must, this is very important, you absolutely must write your email address correctly or you will not receive your certificate. If there are any spelling errors in your email address, we have no way of contacting you and you will not be able to receive it. So just make sure your email address is spelled correctly. And finally, the deadline to submit this survey, whether it goes out today or on Monday, is going to be Friday, the 21st of November. So again, keep your eye out for that in your email inbox. It will be coming up very soon. And again, keep up the good work, everybody. This has been a really, really phenomenal cycle of youth leadership training. We're so excited that it seems like you guys have gotten a lot out of it. The questions, the discussion that we've had every week have been really, really awesome. And again, if you have missed any of our sessions, please check out the recordings on the World Ocean Day YouTube channel. They're all up there for you to view at any point. You can even watch sessions from previous cycles. If you have some questions that you might still have, you can watch insight from other speakers as well, which might be interesting for you to do. And then I would really, really encourage you to take what you've learned and put it into action. Of course, World Ocean Day is on the 8th of June. That is an excellent opportunity to do exactly that. The World Ocean Day website offers tons of different resources, including an event planning toolkit. There's also a social media planning toolkit that's on there every year. There are posters available in different languages that are available for you to print out yourself. You can use the World Ocean Day logo on whatever you would like is available for download in different colors on the website. And then every year there is also a world map and calendar that you can submit your event to get as many eyes on it as possible. So we really try to support youth event planners, campaign organizers all around the world. So please check out those resources. They are available for you to use at any time. And lastly, just thank you guys so much for joining us for this program. If you enjoyed it, please let us know. If you have any questions, please let us know. And remember that you are also available, you are welcome to sign up and register for the next cycle of leadership training that's happening in February and March of 2026 in the new year. So that registration is open if you enjoyed this one. You want to have the same experience with a whole new host of speakers. We really encourage you to do that as well. But Jose, Matthew, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. We really, really appreciate you hanging out with us today, taking the time. And again, if you have a chance, if you have an additional like 20 to 30 minutes to hang out with our World Ocean Day Youth Advisory Council with that link that Ji-Hyun sent in our chat, that would be awesome. But if not, no worries. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you all.
Thank
Real
you.
pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you, Matthew. Yes. All right, everyone. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we will see you online soon.
Okay, Laura, what do I need to do to go on to the next session?
Give me